The shuttle was small and old. It shook as it crossed the gap between the transport carrier and the massive warship that waited in the dark of space. Inside the shuttle, a single man sat with his hands on his knees and his bag between his boots. His name was Cale Maddox. He was a sergeant. He was 29 years old, and he was the only human within 400 light years. Through the dirty window, he could see the ship he was headed toward, the VSS Throne of Silence. It was the flagship of Princess Queen Salith Varanai, ruler of the Varanai Dominion and commander of 600 warships. The vessel stretched across the void like a living thing, silver and black, covered in strange patterns that glowed faintly blue. It was 3 kilometers long. Cale's entire hometown could have fit inside it twice. He took a slow breath and checked his uniform one more time. It was clean. His boots were polished. His hair was short. He looked like a proper soldier, even if no one on that ship would care. The shuttle docked with a heavy clang. The doors opened and cold air rushed in. It smelled like metal and something sweet, like flowers mixed with electricity. Cale picked up his bag, stepped out, and walked into the docking bay of the most powerful warship in the sector. They were already waiting for him. A line of Varanai officers stood in formation near the bay entrance. They were tall, all of them. The shortest was nearly 7 feet. Their skin was smooth and pale, shifting between silver and soft blue depending on how the light touched them. They had 4 eyes each, 2 large and 2 small, and their movements were slow and graceful, like dancers who had never known urgency. At the front of the line stood High Commander Zorvek. He was not Varanai. He was Kethari, a reptilian species with dark green scales, a thick jaw, and arms like tree trunks. He wore heavy black armor and carried a blade on his back that was longer than Cale was tall. His yellow eyes locked onto Cale the moment he stepped off the shuttle. Cale stopped in front of him and saluted. Sergeant Cale Maddox, reporting for assignment under the Galactic Integration Initiative. Zorvek did not salute back. He looked down at Cale the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their dinner plate. A human, Zorvek said. His voice was deep and rough. They sent a human. He turned to the officers behind him. Let the record show what the sovereignty thinks of the Varanai Dominion. They sent us a Class 9 species. No telepathy, no natural armor, no regeneration, bones made of calcium, a lifespan of less than a century. He looked back at Cale. You are, by every measure the galaxy uses, the weakest thing on this ship. The officers did not laugh. They did not need to. Their silence said enough. Cale stood still. His face showed nothing. He did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply waited until Zorvek was finished, and then he said, "Where should I report for duty, sir?" Zorvek stared at him for a long moment. Something flickered behind those yellow eyes, not respect, but a kind of confusion. Most species would have reacted. The felony would have tried to posture. The Dreth would have growled. Even the Miroshi, known for their calm, would have shown some sign of discomfort. This human showed nothing. Deck 17, Zorvek said at last. Rear support. You will assist with cargo and maintenance. Understood, Cale said. He picked up his bag and walked past the line of officers without looking at any of them. High above the docking bay, on a balcony wrapped in shadow, Princess Queen Salith Varanai watched. She stood with her arms folded behind her back. Her skin was darker than the others, a deep silver blue that seemed to hold starlight beneath its surface. Her 4 eyes tracked the human as he crossed the bay floor. She wore no crown. She did not need one. Everything about her, her height, her stillness, the quiet glow of the markings along her neck made it clear what she was. A human, she said quietly. Beside her, Lyra, her handmaiden and intelligence operative, nodded. The Integration Initiative required us to accept 1 foreign soldier. The sovereignty assigned him. I did not request anyone. No, Your Majesty, that is likely why they sent a human. Salith watched Cale disappear through a corridor door. He did not react to Zorvek. No, Lyra agreed, he did not. Salith said nothing more. She turned and walked away, her long coat trailing behind her like a shadow. But Lyra noticed that the Queen glanced back once before she left. Down on deck 17, Cale found his bunk. It was small, tucked into a corner near the cargo bays. The ceiling was low enough that a Varanai would have to bend nearly in half to enter. The bed was a metal slab with a thin pad on top. There was a locker, a small light, and nothing else. He set his bag down, sat on the bed, and pulled out a data tablet. On it were files he had downloaded before leaving Earth. Varanai combat manuals, ship schematics for Throne-class warships, medical texts on Varanai biology, a language guide. He had taught himself the Varanai language in 6 weeks, not perfectly, but well enough to read their tactical documents. No one had asked him to. No one expected him to. He did it because that was who he was. For the next several hours, Cale read. He studied the ship's layout until he could walk it blind. He memorized emergency protocols, weapon systems, and the names and ranks of every senior officer. He made notes in the margins of the combat manuals, not corrections, just observations, places where human tactical thinking differed from Varanai doctrine. He did not complain. He did not feel sorry for himself. He had been underestimated before. Every human had. It was the one thing their species had in common across every culture, every nation, every war they had ever fought. Someone always looked at them and saw something small. On the third night, Lyra walked past Deck 17 on her way to the Intelligence Center. She paused near Cale's open door and looked in. He was sitting cross-legged on his bunk, reading a Varanai surgical manual. In the original language, he was making notes in a small book with a pencil, an actual wooden pencil, something she had never seen before. She watched him for a full minute. He did not notice her. He was completely absorbed. Lyra continued to the Intelligence Center and added a single line to her daily report for the Queen. The human is studying. He may be more than what he appears. Salith read the report that evening. She read that line twice. 4 days later, everything changed. It started with silence. A long-range sensor station on the frontier missed its scheduled check-in. Then another. Then 6 more. 8 stations, spread across a line of space nearly 2 light-years wide, all went dark within the same hour. The communications officer on the bridge reported it to Zorvek with a tremor in her voice. Zorvek reported it to Salith with none. "It could be equipment failure," he said. 8 stations do not fail at once, Salith replied. She stood before the command display, watching the map of dead signals spread like a wound across the frontier. She gave the order. The fleet would change course. 600 warships turned as one and began moving toward the silence. Deep in the belly of the ship on Deck 17, Cale felt the vibration of the engines change. He set down his tablet, looked at the ceiling, and understood. Something was coming. He reached under his bunk, pulled out his gear bag, and began to check his equipment, piece by piece, calm and careful, the way a man does when he knows the world is about to get loud. The fleet reached the first dead station in 14 hours. What they found made even Zorvek go quiet. The station was not destroyed. It was changed. The metal walls had been twisted and bent inward like something massive had grabbed them and squeezed. Strange, dark tissue covered the corridors, organic matter fused with the steel, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The air inside was thick with a smell that the sensors could not identify. It was not gas. It was not chemical. The closest description any officer could give was that it smelled alive. The crew was gone, not dead, not missing, absorbed. Their shapes could be seen beneath the organic tissue on the walls, frozen mid-scream, their bodies melted into the structure of the station itself. Salith reviewed the sensor data from the bridge. Her face showed nothing, but her 4 eyes moved quickly, processing. Beside her, Zorvek stood with his hand on his blade. "We need a reconnaissance team inside the largest station," she said. "Full combat squad, Environmental suits. I want to know what did this. Zorvek selected his best soldiers, 8 elite Varanai warriors and 4 Cathari heavy troopers. Then he added one more name to the list. The human will go as well, he said. We need someone to test atmospheric conditions before the primary team enters. If the air is toxic, better to lose him than one of ours. No one objected. Kale received the order on his tablet. He read it, understood exactly what it meant, and suited up without a word. 20 minutes later, he stood in the shuttle bay beside 12 alien soldiers, each one taller, stronger, and better armed than him. They did not look at him. He did not expect them to. The shuttle crossed the gap to the station in silence. The team breached the outer airlock and stepped inside. The corridor was dark. Emergency lights flickered in red, casting long shadows across the organic tissue that covered everything. The floor was soft underfoot like walking on muscle. The walls breathed. Kale was sent in first. He walked 30 meters ahead of the team, alone, checking his atmospheric reader with every step. The air was breathable but heavy, filled with particles the scanner could not classify. His suit filtered it, but he could feel the weight of it in his chest. Atmosphere is stable, he reported through his comm. Oxygen is low but functional, no immediate toxins. The team moved in behind him. The Varanai soldiers walked in perfect formation, their energy rifles humming softly. The Cathari carried heavy plasma axes. They were calm and professional. They had trained for this kind of operation for years. None of that training prepared them for what came next. They reached the central hub of the station, a wide, circular room that had once served as the command center. Now it was a nest. The walls were covered in thick, dark cocoons, each one the size of a person. Some of them were moving. "What are those?" the squad leader whispered. One of the cocoons split open. The thing that crawled out was not alive in any way they understood. It was made of parts, pieces of the station's crew, rearranged and rebuilt into something new. It had too many limbs. Its face was a blank surface of stretched skin, and it moved fast, faster than anything that size should move. It hit the nearest Varanai soldier before anyone could fire. The soldier was dead in 2 seconds. The creature tore through his armor like it was paper and burrowed into his chest. 3 seconds later, the soldier's body stood back up, but it was not him anymore. His eyes were black. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and he turned toward his own team. The cocoons began opening, all of them at once. The squad leader shouted orders that were swallowed by the sound of screaming and gunfire. 2 more Varanai fell in the first 10 seconds. A Cathari trooper swung his plasma axe and cut one of the creatures in half, but both halves kept moving, crawling across the floor toward him. Panic hit the team like a wave. These were elite soldiers, the best the Dominion had, and they were being torn apart by something they could not understand. The squad leader, a decorated Varanai officer with 40 years of service, froze. His 4 eyes went wide, his body locked in place, and his neural systems began the automatic pain-dampening shutdown that all Varanai experienced under extreme stress. Kale did not freeze. His heart was hammering. His hands were shaking. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to run. He was terrified, completely, honestly, deeply terrified. And he moved anyway. "Fall back to the corridor," he shouted. His voice cut through the chaos not because it was loud but because it was clear. "Everyone move now. I will hold this door." He grabbed a chemical canister from the station's emergency supply rack, ripped it open, and mixed it with the contents of a second canister. The result was crude, dangerous, and exactly what he needed, a liquid that burned hot enough to melt steel. He threw it at the doorway. The organic tissue caught fire instantly, creating a wall of flame between the team and the creatures. The thing screamed, a sound that was not a voice but a vibration that shook the walls. "Move," Kale shouted again. The surviving soldiers ran. Kale stayed at the choke point. The creatures tried to push through the fire. He hit them with everything he had, his sidearm, another improvised incendiary, and finally his bare hands when one of them got close enough to grab him. It slashed his left arm open from shoulder to elbow. He felt the pain, white and blinding, and kept fighting. It cracked 2 of his ribs with a single strike. He stumbled, caught himself, and threw the creature back into the flames. His arm was hanging wrong. He could feel the bone was broken somewhere near the elbow. Blood was running down his side from the rib fracture. His vision was going gray at the edges. He grabbed a metal strut from the wall, bit down on his own lip until it bled, and used the strut to splint his broken arm. He wrapped it with a strip torn from his suit. The pain was so intense that his legs nearly gave out. He stayed standing. He held that corridor for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of fire and blood and screaming. 4 minutes during which every survival instinct in the galaxy said he should have collapsed, gone into shock, and died. When the last surviving soldiers reached the shuttle, the Cathari trooper looked back and saw Kale stumbling down the corridor toward them. His suit was torn and soaked in blood, both his own and something darker. His arm was bound to his chest with metal and fabric. He was limping badly, and he was still conscious. "Close the airlock behind me," Kale said as he stepped through. Then his legs buckled and he dropped to one knee. The Cathari trooper caught him before he hit the floor. On the shuttle ride back, no one spoke. The surviving Varanai soldiers sat in silence, their 4 eyes fixed on the human who was bleeding quietly in the corner. They had seen warriors fall. They had seen bravery, but they had never seen anything like what they had just witnessed. It was not his strength. He was weaker than all of them. It was not his weapons. His equipment was basic at best. It was something else, something they had no word for in their language. He had been afraid, they all saw it. His hands had been shaking, his eyes wide, his breath rapid. He felt every bit of pain, every injury, every moment of terror. His body did not shut down to protect him. His mind did not go numb. He experienced all of it, fully and completely. And he fought through it anyway. The shuttle docked. The medical team rushed in. Kale was carried to the infirmary on a stretcher, still conscious, still giving a report into his comm about the creatures and their behavior. That evening, Lyra delivered her report to Princess Queen Salith. It was detailed, precise, and clinical. But at the end, she had added a personal note, something she had never done before. The human held a choke point alone against an unknown enemy for 4 minutes with a broken arm, fractured ribs, and severe blood loss. When asked afterward how he managed to stay conscious, he said, "I just did not have permission to pass out yet." Salith read the report in her private chambers. She set it down, stood, and walked to the window that looked out into space. She stayed there for a long time. In the infirmary below, Zorvek stood at the foot of Kale's bed, watching the human sleep. The medical scans showed damage that would have put a Varanai soldier in a healing coma for weeks. The human's body was already beginning to repair itself, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but it was working. Zorvek said nothing. He turned and left. But he did not call the human expendable again. The summons arrived at Kale's infirmary bed on the 5th day after the station mission. It was written in formal Varanai script on a sheet of thin silver metal, the traditional method used only for royal communication. The words were simple. "You will present yourself before the Princess Queen at the 7th hour. Chamber of reflection. Come alone." The medical officer told him he was not fit to stand. His ribs were still healing. His arm was wrapped in a biocast that hummed softly as it worked to repair the fracture. He had lost enough blood during the mission that his skin was still pale. Kale stood up, put on a clean uniform, and walked to the chamber of reflection at the 7th hour. The room was unlike anything else on the ship. It was round, with a ceiling that curved upward into a dome of transparent crystal. Stars filled the view above, thousands of them, bright and cold against the black. The walls were bare stone, polished smooth, and the only light came from the stars themselves and from the faint glow of the markings on Salith's skin. She stood at the center of the room, alone, no guards, no advisors, no Lyra, just the queen standing with her hands clasped behind her back, her 4 eyes watching him as he entered. Kale stopped 3 paces from her and saluted. "Sit," she said. She gestured to a low bench carved from the same stone as the walls. There was no second seat. She intended to stand. He sat, she studied him. Up close, she was striking in a way that went beyond appearance. She was tall enough that even seated, Kale had to look up at her. Her skin shifted color as she breathed, darkening and lightening in rhythm. Her eyes, the larger pair dark violet, the smaller pair silver, moved across his face with the precision of someone reading a document. "I have watched the combat recordings from the station," she said. Her voice was low and layered, carrying harmonics that vibrated in his chest. "3 of my elite soldiers died in the first engagement. My squad leader, a man who has served me for 40 years, suffered a neural shutdown and could not move. You had a broken arm, damaged ribs, and significant blood loss." She paused. "And you held a corridor, alone for 4 minutes." "Yes, ma'am," Kale said. "Explain to me how." Kale thought about it, not because he did not know the answer, but because he wanted to give her an honest one. "Humans do not have the neural dampening that Var and I have," he said. "When we are hurt, we feel all of it. When we are afraid, we feel all of that too. Our bodies do not shut down to protect us from pain or fear. We experience everything at full intensity, all the time." He looked at his hands. The left one still trembled slightly from nerve damage. "So we learned to keep going anyway, not because the pain stops. It does not stop. We just decided a long time ago that pain is not a good enough reason to quit." Salith was quiet for a long time. In Varanai culture, pain beyond a certain threshold triggered an automatic biological response. The mind would slow, the body would enter a protective state, and the individual would effectively shut down until the damage was managed. It was elegant. It was efficient. It had kept their species safe for millennia. And it meant that in the worst moments, when the situation demanded everything, their best soldiers simply stopped functioning. "Your species has no such protection," she said. "No. And yet you survive." "We do more than survive," Kale said. It was not a boast. He said it the way someone might state that water is wet. "We have been at war with ourselves, with our planet, and with everything on it for our entire existence. Our world has ice ages, supervolcanoes, earthquakes, predators, diseases, and radiation storms. We went to war over land, over ideas, over things we cannot even remember anymore. And through all of it, we kept going." He met her eyes. "That is not a weakness, Your Majesty. That is what we are." Salith did not respond immediately. She turned and looked up at the stars through the crystal dome. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not softer, but more careful. "I am reassigning you. Effective immediately, you will serve in my tactical advisory unit. You will attend all strategic briefings and provide input on combat operations." Kale blinked. "With respect, Your Majesty, High Commander Zorvek will not approve." "Zorvek serves me," she said, "not the other way around." The next morning, Kale reported to the Strategic Command Center on the upper decks. The room was massive, filled with holographic displays showing fleet positions, enemy movements, and intelligence reports. A long table ran down the center, surrounded by senior officers from every division. When Kale walked in, every head turned. The silence was immediate and hostile. Zorvik stood at the far end of the table, his yellow eyes narrowed. "What is he doing here?" "He is here on my order," Salith said from the head of the table. "He will observe and contribute. Sit, Sergeant." Kale sat. He did not speak for the first hour. He listened. He watched the officers debate fleet formations, engagement protocols, and resource allocation. He studied their holographic maps and ran calculations in his head. Then the discussion turned to the holo. Intelligence had confirmed that the creatures from the station were part of something larger, a swarm intelligence that had not been seen in the galaxy for 10,000 years. It consumed civilizations. It adapted to any weapon used against it, and it was moving toward Varanai space. The officers proposed a standard defensive formation, a wide crescent of ships designed to absorb an attack and hold the line. It was elegant, symmetrical, and followed centuries of Varanai military doctrine. Kale raised his hand. The table went silent again. Zorvek looked like he wanted to break the table in half. "Speak," Saleth said. Kale stood and walked to the holographic display. He pointed to the center of the crescent formation. "This formation assumes the enemy will engage you head-on, with honor, the way your doctrine expects. But the holo is not a military force. It is a predator. It does not care about your formation. It will look for the weakest point and pour everything into it." He moved the display, rotating the map. "Your crescent has a gap here, at the junction between the 3rd and 4th Fleet groups. It is small, maybe 200 meters, but it is there because your doctrine requires a communication buffer zone between fleet groups. The holo will find it, and when it does, it will split your fleet in half and eat you from the inside." The room was dead quiet. "How would you fix it?" Saleth asked. Kale looked at her. "I would not use a crescent at all. I would use a layered box formation with overlapping fields of fire and no gaps. It is ugly. It is not elegant. Your ancestors would probably hate it, but it works." One of the senior admirals spoke up, his voice cold. "And how does a Class 9 species know more about fleet combat than the Varanai War Academy?" Kale turned to face him. "Because where I come from, we do not train for fair fights. We train for the fight where everything goes wrong. We train for ambushes, traps, and enemies who do not play by the rules. We spent 10,000 years killing each other, Admiral. We are very good at figuring out how things die." The Admiral opened his mouth, then closed it. Saleth leaned forward in her seat. "Show me the box formation." Kale built it on the holographic display, piece by piece, explaining each layer. It was rough, unpolished, and completely unlike anything the Varanai had ever used. But the math was sound. The geometry was tight. And when he ran a simulation against a swarm-style attack, the formation held. The officers stared at the results. Zorvek stared at Kale. After the briefing, Lyra found Kale in the observation corridor. She walked beside him in silence for a while before she spoke. "You are not what they expected," she said. "I never am," he replied. She smiled, a rare thing for a Varanai intelligence operative. "Tell me about your world. Tell me about Earth." So he did. He told her about oceans that could swallow entire continents, about storms that could flatten cities, about creatures with teeth and claws and venom that had hunted humans for millions of years, about volcanoes that had nearly wiped out the species entirely, about ice that had covered half the planet and forced his ancestors to survive on almost nothing. Lyra listened with growing unease. In the Varanai database, Earth was classified as a moderate habitability world. Hearing Kale describe it, she realized the classification was catastrophically wrong. "Your people survived all of that?" she asked. "Survived it, adapted to it, and then dominated it," Kale said. "Every predator that hunted us is either extinct or in a cage. Every disease that tried to kill us has a cure. Every mountain, ocean, and desert on our planet has a human footprint on it." He looked out the window at the stars. "We are not strong. We are not fast. We do not have claws or armor or telepathy, but we do not stop. That is the thing nobody here understands yet. We simply do not stop." 3 decks above, Saleth sat alone in her chamber, replaying the briefing recording. She paused it on the moment Kale had looked at the Admiral and said the words that were now stuck in her mind like a splinter. "We are very good at figuring out how things die." She played it again. And again. That evening, her long-range scouts sent a priority alert. The hollow swarm had been detected. It was not a raiding party. It was not a scouting force. It was an armada. 10,000 bioships, blotting out the stars like a living stain, moving directly toward the Varanai fleet. The war was no longer coming. It was here. And for the first time in her reign, Salith was glad she had a human on her ship. The first 3 defense lines fell in less than 6 hours. The hollow swarm moved like a living ocean, 10,000 bioships surging forward in waves that adapted to every weapon the Varanai fired at them. Energy beams cut through the first wave, but the second wave had already grown reflective shells. Kinetic rounds shattered the third wave, but the fourth wave had thickened its armor. Missiles found their marks on the fifth wave, but the sixth wave released clouds of organic chaff that detonated the warheads before they could hit. Every time the Varanai killed 100, 1,000 more took their place, and every ship the Hollow consumed was absorbed, broken down, rebuilt, and added to the swarm. Salith stood on the bridge of the Throne of Silence and watched her outer fleet crumble. She gave orders in a steady voice. She repositioned squadrons, redirected fire corridors, and managed retreats with the precision of someone who had trained for war her entire life. But her eyes betrayed something that her voice did not. She was running out of options. The fleet fell back toward Varanai Prime, the homeworld. 6 billion Varanai lived on that world. Entire cities, libraries, temples, and generations of history sat beneath its silver clouds. Losing the planet was not an option. It was the end of everything. Salith sent emergency requests to the galactic sovereignty. The other 4 great houses responded within hours. The Moroshi expressed deep concern and offered prayers. The Felony sent a message of solidarity. The Kethari Empire said it would monitor the situation. The Drevani Collective promised to review its defense obligations at the next council meeting. No one sent ships. "They are going to let us die," Zorvik said, standing beside Salith on the bridge. For the first time, his voice carried no anger, only the flat sound of a man who understood the truth. "Yes," Salith said. "Then we fight alone." "Not entirely," said a voice from behind them. They turned. Kale stood at the entrance to the bridge, his arms still in a biocast, his face calm. In his hand, he held a data pad. "I sent a message to Earth Command 6 days ago," he said. "They are sending a fleet." Zorvik's eyes narrowed. "How many ships?" 60. The number hung in the air. 60 ships. Against the thousands that remained of the hollow swarm, Zorvik almost laughed. 60 human ships, he said. "That is not a fleet, that is a funeral." Kale did not argue. He walked to the tactical display and pulled up the holographic map of the battlefield. "I have a plan," he said. "You are not going to like it." Salith looked at him. She had learned by now that when the human said those words, he meant them. "Show me," she said. Kale highlighted Varanai Prime's largest moon on the display. It was called Ethara, a dead, rocky body with an unstable geological core. Centuries of mining had weakened its internal structure, and deep scans showed a network of magma chambers that were barely stable. "The hollow swarm moves like a predator," Kale said. "It chases weakness. If we create a weakness on purpose, a gap in our lines near Ethara, the swarm will pour into it. It is what they do. They cannot resist an opening." He drew a line on the display, showing the swarm flowing through the gap toward the moon. "Once enough of them are in the gravity well around Ethara, we detonate the moon's core. The explosion will collapse the gravity field and create a shockwave that will destroy everything within 50,000 kilometers." The room went cold. "You want to destroy a moon," Zorvik said. "I want to destroy 4,000 of their ships in one strike," Kale corrected. "That is nearly half of what remains. The swarm will be crippled. Your fleet can handle the rest." Admiral Thanes, the senior Varanai fleet commander, stepped forward. The detonation sequence would need to be triggered manually. The hollow jams all remote signals within its swarm radius. Someone would have to go to the core, set the charges, and trigger them in person. Yes, Kale said. That is a death sentence, Thanes said. Probably, Kale agreed. The bridge was silent. Officers looked at each other, at the Queen, at the human standing in front of them with a broken arm and a plan that was either brilliant or insane. Salith spoke. Who would go? Kale looked at her. I will. He said it the way he said everything, without drama, without performance, without seeking anyone's approval. He stated it as a fact, the same way he might say that water flows downhill. I am the most expendable person on this ship, he continued, and I am the only one whose body will not shut down from pain or stress during the mission. If someone has to fight through a hollow-infested tunnel system with explosives on their back, it needs to be someone who can function while injured. That is what humans do. Zorvek opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to object. Every instinct told him this was wrong, that sending the weakest soldier on the most dangerous mission was backwards, foolish, against every principle of military logic. But he could not argue with the truth of what Kale had said. Salith's face was stone. She looked at Kale for a long time, searching for something in his expression. He met her gaze without flinching. There was fear in his eyes, she could see it clearly. He was afraid. But beneath the fear was something harder, something unbreakable, and she understood finally that this was what made humans different. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear. Approved, she said. The word came out harder than she intended. Kale nodded and left the bridge to prepare. That night, Lyra found him in the armory, loading charges into a reinforced pack. She stood in the doorway and watched him work. Why are you not afraid? She asked. He looked at her and smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that held more weight than words. I am afraid, he said. I am terrified. My hands have been shaking for the last hour. My stomach feels like it is full of broken glass. Then how do you keep working? He snapped the last charge into place and zipped the pack closed. Because fear is not a wall. It is just weather. You walk through weather. 2 Varanai soldiers appeared behind Lyra. They were from the station mission, the ones who had survived because Kale had held the corridor. They wore full combat gear. One of them stepped forward and saluted. We are going with you, she said. Kale looked at them. You understand what this mission is. We do. He nodded slowly, then welcome aboard. The assault shuttle launched at dawn. Kale and his 2 volunteers flew toward Ethara while the fleet executed his plan, opening a deliberate gap in the defensive line near the moon. Just as Kale predicted, the hollow swarm saw the weakness and surged toward it. Thousands of bioships poured through the gap, flooding the space around Ethara like a dark tide. On the moon's surface, the tunnel system was already infested. Hollow organisms had burrowed into the rock and lined the corridors with the same living tissue they had seen on the station. The air was thick and wrong. The walls moved. They fought their way in, room by room, tunnel by tunnel. The hollow creatures came at them from every direction, crawling from the walls, dropping from the ceiling, rising from the floor. Kale's Varanai companions fought with a fury he had never seen from their species. They were choosing to be here. They were choosing to face the pain. The first Varanai soldier fell in the 3rd tunnel. A hollow drone caught her from behind and dragged her into the wall. She screamed once, then silence. Kale could not save her. He kept moving. The 2nd Varanai soldier fell at the entrance to the core chamber. He took a cluster of drones with him, detonating a charge on his own body to clear the path. The explosion threw Kale against the far wall and cracked 3 more of his ribs. He was alone. His arm was bleeding through the biocast. His ribs were grinding against each other with every breath. His vision was flickering. A piece of shrapnel was embedded in his left thigh. Every step was agony. He reached the core chamber, he set the charges, he armed the detonation device. And then he did what no Varanai would have done. He looked around the chamber and started calculating. The chamber was deep, the rock was thick, the blast would travel upward and outward. If he could find a pocket, a depression in the rock, a side tunnel, anything, and reinforce it with the remaining materials in his pack, there was a chance, a small one. He ran the numbers in his head, 11.7% chance of survival. He almost laughed. He found a narrow crevice in the chamber wall, 20 meters from the detonation point. He crawled inside, wedged himself into the rock, pulled a blast shield from his pack over his body, and hit the trigger. The moon broke apart from the inside. On the bridge of the Throne of Silence, every screen went white. The shockwave rippled outward from Ethara in a sphere of light and force that swallowed 4,000 hollow bioships in an instant. They burned. They shattered. They dissolved into nothing. The crew watched in stunned silence as nearly half the hollow swarm vanished in a single heartbeat. Then the silence settled. The debris field expanded. The comm channels were filled with static. Salith stood at the command console, gripping its edge with both hands. Her knuckles had gone pale. Her eyes were locked on the point where Ethara had been. Nothing, static, dust. Then faint, broken, barely there, a signal. Maddox to throne. The voice was ragged, wet, and barely above a whisper. Target destroyed, requesting pickup, if it is not too much trouble. The bridge erupted, officers shouted, consoles flashed. Someone was crying, a sound that Varanai almost never made. Salith did not shout. She did not cry. She closed her eyes, and her markings, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin, flared bright, brighter than anyone on the bridge had ever seen them. She opened her eyes and gave a single order. "Bring him home." They pulled him from the wreckage 17 hours later. The rescue shuttle found his signal buried beneath 40 meters of shattered rock and fused metal. When the extraction team cut through the debris and reached the crevice where he had sheltered, they found him curled on his side with the blast shield melted to his back. His biocast was destroyed. His left leg was bent at an angle that made the medics wince. Blood had dried in dark lines down his face and neck. His breathing was shallow, ragged, and uneven. But he was breathing. The Varanai medical team worked on him for 9 straight hours. They repaired his ribs with biofoam, set his leg with stabilizer rods, and sealed the shrapnel wound in his thigh. They replaced nearly a third of his blood volume. They treated burns across his shoulders and back where the blast shield had superheated against his skin. What fascinated them and quietly disturbed them was what his body was already doing on its own. The edges of his wounds were closing. New tissue was forming over the burns. His white blood cells were attacking infection sites with an aggression the medical officers had never seen in any species. His body was not healing fast, but it was healing stubbornly, refusing to give ground to the damage. "It is like his biology does not accept death as an outcome," the chief medical officer told Lyra. "Every system in his body is fighting, not efficiently, not elegantly, but fighting." On the second day, Kale opened his eyes. On the third day, he asked for his data tablet. On the 5th day, Salith came to see him. She dismissed the medical staff and the guards. The infirmary doors closed, and for the first time since the night in the chamber of reflection, they were alone. He was sitting up in his bed, pale and thin, with bandages wrapped around most of his upper body. He tried to stand when she entered. She raised a hand and he stopped. She pulled a chair from the wall and sat beside his bed. For a while she said nothing. She simply looked at him, this small, fragile, impossibly stubborn creature who had blown up a moon and somehow lived. "I have ruled the Varanai Dominion for 11 years, she said at last. "I have commanded armies. I have ended rebellions. I have passed judgment on billions of lives. I have met warriors, kings, and minds that could reshape the fabric of space." She paused. None of them have done what you did. Kale shifted in his bed, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. I just did the math. The odds were in my favor. 11% is not in anyone's favor. It is if you are human. The ghost of a smile crossed her face, barely visible, gone almost before it appeared. Then her expression shifted into something more open, more vulnerable than he had ever seen from her. Why? She asked. You owe us nothing. My people treated you like cargo. Zorvek humiliated you. My officers ignored you. The galaxy calls your species primitive and forgettable. You had no reason to fight for us. No reason to nearly die for people who would not have done the same for you. She leaned forward, so why? Kale looked at her for a long moment. He thought about all the complicated answers he could give: duty, honor, strategy, political advantage. They were all true in small ways, but they were not the real answer. Because you needed help, he said. That is it. That is the whole reason. Where I come from, you do not need a reason beyond that. Salith went still. In Varanai philosophy, power was the foundation of everything. Strength earned respect. Conquest earned loyalty. Every relationship, every alliance, every bond was built on a calculation of advantage. The idea that someone would risk everything simply because another being was in danger, with no expectation of reward, recognition, or return, was so foreign to her that it felt like hearing a new color described for the first time. She sat back in her chair and said nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Your species frightens me, Sergeant, not because of what you can do, but because of why you do it. 3 days later, the hollow swarm regrouped. It was smaller now. The destruction of Ethara had crippled nearly half its numbers, but what remained was different. The swarm had adapted as it always did, and this time it had adapted specifically to counter humans. Its drones moved faster, targeting human biological weaknesses, temperature sensitivity, oxygen dependency, exposed skin. It had studied Kale's tactics and built counters for every one of them. The swarm began its final push toward Varanai Prime. Salith's remaining fleet, battered, exhausted, and down to 400 ships, formed up for a last stand. And then the sensors detected new contacts, dropping out of faster-than-light travel behind the fleet. 60 ships, small, gray, boxy, built without elegance, without beauty, without any concession to aesthetics. They looked like they had been welded together in a hurry by people who cared more about function than form. Human ships. The comm channel crackled. A voice came through, rough, female, and completely unbothered by the apocalyptic situation. This is Admiral Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We heard you folks could use a hand. Point us at the bad guys. Kale, who had dragged himself to the bridge against every medical recommendation, leaned on the railing and smiled. The human fleet did not fight like the Varanai. They did not form elegant lines or execute graceful maneuvers. They fought the way humans have always fought, with everything they had in every direction, using every trick, tool, and dirty tactic their species had invented across 10,000 years of warfare. They rammed hollow bioships with reinforced hulls. They launched boarding parties, actual soldiers in spacesuits, flying across the void with magnetic boots and cutting torches to land on enemy vessels and tear them apart from the inside. They detonated pulse charges that disrupted the swarm's communication network. They used their own damaged ships as decoys, luring hollow forces into kill zones. They took devastating losses. Ship after ship was torn apart, consumed, or destroyed. Human crews died by the hundreds, and the remaining ships did not retreat. They did not slow down. They did not stop. On the bridge of the Throne of Silence, the Varanai crew watched in stunned silence as a human destroyer, its hull cracked open and venting atmosphere, turned directly into a cluster of hollow bioships and detonated its reactor. The explosion consumed the destroyer and 17 enemy vessels. The crew of that ship, had known exactly what they were doing. Zorvik stood at the tactical display, watching the human fleet throw itself into the swarm with a ferocity that defied everything he understood about warfare. His clawed hands gripped the console. His jaw was tight. "They are not primitive," he said quietly. No one heard him. He said it again, louder, to no one and everyone. "They are not primitive, they are relentless." The Varanai fleet, shaken from its exhaustion by what it was witnessing, rallied. Salith gave the order to advance, and 400 Varanai warships surged forward alongside the human fleet. For the first time in galactic history, the two species fought as one. Kale stood beside Salith on the bridge, coordinating the joint assault. His body was broken, his voice was hoarse, his hands were shaking, and he did not stop. He called out targets, redirected fire patterns, and adjusted formations with a mind that refused to quit even as his body begged him to. The battle lasted 11 hours. When it was over, the hollow swarm was gone, not retreated, destroyed. The combined fury of Varanai precision and human stubbornness had ground the ancient horror into dust and silence. The void was filled with wreckage, Varanai, human and hollow, all drifting together in the quiet dark. 1 week later, Princess Queen Salith Varanai stood before the full assembly of the galactic sovereignty. Every great house was represented. Every species watched. The chamber was vast, ancient, and filled with beings who had spent centuries treating humanity as a footnote. Salith spoke without notes. "You classified them as Class 9, she said. "The lowest tier. You measured them by what they lack: no telepathy, no armor, no regeneration, no natural weapons. You looked at them and saw weakness." She paused. "I watched a human soldier hold a corridor alone with a broken arm against enemies that killed my best warriors in seconds. I watched him identify flaws in battle plans that my finest admirals missed. I watched him detonate a moon and survive, because he calculated an 11% chance and decided those were acceptable odds. I watched his people cross the galaxy to fight for a species that had treated them with nothing but contempt, and I watched them die, willingly, knowingly, so that our world could live." Her voice carried through the chamber, resonating in the bones of every being present. "You measured them by what they lack. You should have measured them by what they refuse to lose." The chamber was silent. "I am requesting the immediate reclassification of humanity," Salith continued. "Not to Class 1. The current system has no category that describes what they are. I am proposing a new classification: Apex Persistent Species. A species whose primary evolutionary advantage is the absolute refusal to stop." The vote passed. Not unanimously, but it passed, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. That evening, Salith found Kale on the observation deck of the Throne of Silence. He was standing at the window, looking out at the stars. His arm was in a new cast. His movements were slow and careful. He was healing, the way humans always healed: painfully, imperfectly, but completely. She stood beside him. They did not speak for a long while. "The sovereignty offered you a title," she said. "A lordship, estates on 3 worlds, a command of your own." "I declined," he said. "I know, you accepted my offer instead." He nodded. She had offered him a position as her permanent strategic consort, an advisor bound to the Queen's side in matters of war and peace. It was a role that had never been given to an outsider. It was also, in Varanai tradition, something deeper than a military appointment. It was a bond of trust, a recognition that this person had earned a place at the center of everything. "Your people will talk," he said. "Let them." They stood together in the quiet glow of distant stars. The wreckage of the battle was still visible in the distance, a field of broken ships and scattered light that stretched across the horizon. "Can I ask you something?" Salith said. "Always." "What do humans see when they look at the stars?" Kale thought about it. He looked at the vast, endless darkness filled with points of light that were impossibly far away, each one a furnace, a mystery, a place no human had ever touched. "Adair," he said. Salith looked at him, and then she did something that no one on the ship had ever seen her do, something that no Varanai queen had done in the recorded memory of the Dominion. She laughed. It was quiet, warm, and real. It filled the observation deck like sunlight fills a room, not all at once, but slowly, gently, until everything it touched was changed. Kale smiled. Outside the window, the stars burned on, distant and patient and full of dares that humanity had not yet answered. But they always would. That was the whole trick.